The security camera caught her wedding ring flashing in the dark, on a hand that wasn't her husband's. By the time Jonah Vale saw the footage, the betrayal had already been living in his house for months. It was a Tuesday, one of those gray, work-worn days that blurred into the next. The kind of day that made a man crave nothing grand, just the ordinary comfort of home, keys on the counter, a familiar voice, the smell of something warm in the oven. Jonah didn't even plan to look at the camera recordings. He only opened the security app because their neighbor's teen had posted on the street group chat about someone checking car doors at night. Jonah was the cautious type, quietly cautious, not paranoid. The sort of man who locked windows twice because he'd rather be safe than sorry, and who believed peace was built out of small consistent choices. He sat at the kitchen table with a lukewarm mug of coffee, thumbs scrolling through last night's clips. The camera view was black and white, slightly grainy, the porch light making the rain look like silver threads. Then he saw her. Maya. His wife was supposed to be across town at a late client dinner. She'd texted him at 8:11 p.m. with a photo of a white tablecloth and a wineglass. Networking, she'd written. Don't wait up. But there she was at 9:46 p.m., stepping through their front door, hair damp at the edges, heels in her hand like she didn't want the sound of them on the entryway tile. And behind her, another figure. A man. The camera didn't catch his face clearly. It didn't need to. Jonah's body understood before his mind finished translating what it was seeing. The man leaned close, and Maya tilted her head up. For half a second they were a single shadow, pressed together in the doorway Jonah had painted last summer, the doorway they'd hung a wreath on every winter like a shared ritual. Jonah stared, throat tightening. The man's hand moved, slow, familiar, and the infrared picked up the pale oval of Maya's ring. Her wedding ring flashed once in the dark. Not on Jonah's hand. On someone else's. Jonah's first instinct was denial, the ancient animal impulse to pretend the predator isn't there if you don't look at it. But he did look. He watched the clip again. And again. Each time, the same small, precise movement, Maya's fingers curling around the man's collar as if she'd done it 100 times. The clip ended. The next one started. The front door stayed shut. The porch went empty. Jonah's phone slipped in his palm like it had turned to soap. He set it down carefully, as if one hard movement might crack the screen and, somehow, unmake what it had shown him. The house smelled like lemon cleaner. Maya's idea. She liked things to smell fresh, like a magazine photo. Jonah used to find it comforting. Now it felt like a cover-up. Upstairs, the study door was closed. It had been Jonah's study once, a messy, warm room full of sketchpads and paint samples and half-finished ideas. Jonah designed interiors for restaurants and small hotels. He made other people's spaces feel inviting because he couldn't stand the thought of anyone eating dinner under harsh lighting. Then Maya had started working from home and called the study the quiet room, and Jonah had given it to her the way he gave her everything, without a fight. He'd moved his drafting table into the spare bedroom and told himself it was teamwork. He'd been proud of being easy to live with. He wasn't proud now. He stood slowly, chair legs scraping the tile. His legs felt detached, as if the shock had unplugged him from his own body. He took one step toward the stairs, then stopped. Because he could hear something. A laugh. Maya's laugh. It wasn't the polished one she used with clients. Not the light, controlled, isn't that funny, laugh. It was the real one, low and loose, the laugh she used to make when she was tangled under blankets with Jonah. Watching stupid reality shows and swearing she hated them while begging for the next episode. Jonah hadn't heard that laugh in months. It drifted down the staircase from behind the study door. And then, another voice. A man's voice, close enough that Jonah imagined the shape of it in the room, imagined the heat of breath and the private ease of someone who belonged. The sound didn't just confirm the footage. It sharpened it. Jonah's hand tightened around the banister. He could march up there, fling open the door, and demand the truth like a man in a movie. But Jonah had spent his life learning that the person who stays calm controls the room. So he didn't go up. Not yet. He walked to the garage instead, because he needed air and motion and something that wasn't her voice. He stepped into the colder space, surrounded by paint cans and a ladder and the bicycle he never rode. He leaned his forehead against the metal of the car door until his breathing slowed. Then he made a decision so quiet it barely felt like one. He would not explode. He would not beg. He would not let Maya turn this into a story where Jonah was emotional, unstable, impossible. He would gather the truth until it was heavy enough to crush any lie she tried to float. That night, Jonah slept on his side of the bed with Maya's back to him and her phone face down on the nightstand like a secret. She murmured his name once, half asleep, and he almost answered out of habit. He didn't. In the morning, Maya moved through the kitchen like nothing had happened. She wore a soft cream sweater, hair pulled into a neat knot, her face bright with that well-practiced calm. "You're up early," she said, pouring coffee. Jonah watched her hands. The ring on her finger looked innocent in daylight. That was the cruel part, objects didn't change. Only meaning did. "Couldn't sleep," Jonah said. Maya nodded as if that explained everything. "I have a long day." Meeting after meeting. "Sure," Jonah said, keeping his voice even. Maya leaned over and kissed his cheek. Quick. Efficient. Like a stamp on an envelope. "You're the best," she murmured. Jonah smiled because he'd learned, in business and in marriage, that sometimes you let people say what they need to say while you listen for what they avoid. After she left, Jonah didn't go to work. Instead, he called a lawyer. Her name was Diane Sato, recommended by a contractor Jonah trusted, someone who'd been through a brutal divorce and survived it with his savings intact. Diane's office smelled like paper and peppermint tea. She was in her 60s with steel gray hair and a gaze that didn't flinch. Jonah told her the truth in a flat voice, as if speaking too loudly might make him sound like the villain. "There's video," he said. "And I heard them." Diane nodded once. "Do you have children?" "No." "Joint accounts?" "Yes." "Any business assets in her name?" "No." "My business is separate." Diane's pen moved. "Good. Then here's what we do. We document. We protect your finances. We don't confront until we're ready." Jonah swallowed. "What if she denies it?" "She will," Diane said calmly. "People who lie for comfort don't stop when the comfort ends." Jonah left with a folder of steps: change passwords, copy statements, secure business revenue, avoid emotional confrontations that could be twisted later. On the drive home, he realized something that made his chest tighten again. He wasn't just heartbroken. He was in danger. Not physical danger, Maya wasn't violent. But legal danger, financial danger, reputational danger. Because Maya didn't just work in PR. She worked in image. And Jonah had been living inside her image. The next week, Jonah learned how much he'd missed. He started waking up before dawn, not because he wanted to, but because his mind refused to let him rest. He'd sit at the kitchen table in the dim blue light, laptop open, sorting through bank records and credit card charges like a man excavating his own life. The pattern was clear once he saw it. Hotel charges. Weekday nights. Always paid from their joint card. Client dinners, Maya had called them. Rideshare receipts at odd hours. And then the transfers. Monthly payments labeled consulting to an unfamiliar account. Jonah clicked deeper and saw the name, Kellen Price. The name tightened like a wire around Jonah's ribs. Kellen Price wasn't a stranger. Jonah had worked for him 2 years ago, designing the interiors for a luxury building's public spaces. Kellen was the kind of developer who smiled like he'd purchased friendliness wholesale. He'd shaken Jonah's hand at the opening event and called Jonah's work tasteful, the way someone complimented furniture. Kellen had flirted with Maya that night. Jonah remembered it now with sick clarity, Kellen's eyes lingering, Maya's smile widening, her laugh too bright. Jonah had told himself it was harmless. Jonah had told himself he was secure. He understood something then, something humiliating and freeing at the same time. He had been trusting because he wanted to be the kind of man who didn't need to doubt. Maya had been cheating because she wanted to be the kind of woman who never faced consequences. Those two desires had met and made a lie big enough to live in. Jonah didn't confront her. Not yet. Instead, he became a ghost in his own marriage, present, polite, observant. Maya noticed, of course. She'd always noticed shifts in a room. But she interpreted Jonah's quiet as submission, as fatigue, as the safe kind of sadness that didn't demand answers. One night, she slipped into the kitchen while Jonah washed dishes. "You've been distant," she said softly. Jonah kept his hands in the warm water. "Work." Maya's fingers touched his arm. "Maybe we should do a weekend away. Just us. Reset." Reset. The word made Jonah want to laugh. Reset was what you called it when you wanted the other person to forget. "Sure," Jonah said, turning his head just enough to give her a small smile. "Sounds good." Relief softened Maya's face like a mask settling properly into place. She kissed him again and went upstairs. Jonah waited until he heard the study door click shut. Then he opened his notebook and wrote one line. Truth, then consequence. 2 days later, Maya announced a private fundraising event at the Hearthstone Hotel. Jonah's spine went cold. That was the same hotel brand as the key card he'd glimpsed in her purse. He'd seen it when she'd left her bag open on the couch, the black card flashing gold letters like a secret that wanted to be noticed. "We need to show up as a united front," Maya said while adjusting her earrings in the mirror. "It's important." Jonah met her eyes in the reflection. "Of course." Maya's gaze flickered, just for a heartbeat. As if she wasn't sure whether to be grateful or suspicious. The fundraiser was everything Jonah expected: soft lighting, expensive perfume, laughter that sounded rehearsed. People in tailored suits held champagne flutes and talked about impact, while their watches gleamed like small trophies. Maya moved through the crowd with effortless grace, introducing Jonah as if he were part of her branding strategy. "And this is my husband," she said, hand on his arm. "Jonah. He designs spaces. He makes things beautiful." Jonah smiled and shook hands and listened. Kellen Price was there, leaning against the bar as if he owned the hotel. He wore a charcoal suit, no tie, the look of a man who wanted to seem relaxed while broadcasting power. When he saw Maya, his mouth curved. When he saw Jonah beside her, his eyes sharpened with brief assessment, then softened again into a smile. "Jonah," Kellen said warmly. "Good to see you. Heard you've been busy." Jonah returned the handshake, feeling the firm grip, the confidence of a man who assumed the world would keep making room for him. "Busy enough." Maya laughed lightly. "Kellen is saving the event tonight. Huge donation." Kellen's gaze slid toward Maya like a private promise. "Happy to help." Jonah watched their faces. Watched the tiny, intimate familiarity in how Maya's shoulders angled toward him, how Kellen's smile held a familiarity Jonah had never earned from his own wife lately. Maya excused herself after a while. "I need to check on the auction items," she said, already moving away. Jonah didn't follow immediately. He waited. He watched. 15 minutes later, he saw her slip into the corridor leading to the elevators. Kellen followed, unhurried. Jonah felt his heart pound once, hard, like a fist in his chest. Then he moved. The elevator area was quieter, carpet thick enough to muffle footsteps. The lighting was dimmer, more intimate, the way hotels design spaces for secrets. Maya pressed the button. The elevator doors opened. She stepped inside. Kellen joined her. Jonah stepped in too. Maya's face flickered, shock, fear, calculation, all in the space of a breath. Kellen's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes sharpened. "Oh," Maya said, "too bright." "Jonah. I thought you were." "I wanted some air," Jonah said evenly. "You heading up?" Maya's throat moved. "Just meeting someone." Kellen smiled. "We're discussing a donation package." Jonah nodded slowly. "In a suite." Maya's eyes flashed warning at Kellen, subtle, sharp. Kellen ignored it. The elevator rose. The quiet music overhead felt obscene. At the 12th floor, the doors opened. Maya stepped out, Kellen beside her. Jonah followed. In the hallway, Maya turned sharply. "Jonah. Stop." Jonah stopped. "What are you doing?" she hissed, the real voice slipping out, low, urgent, angry. Jonah looked at her, and the strangest thing happened, he felt calm. "I'm walking," he said. "In a hallway." Maya's nostrils flared. Don't do this. Kellen lifted a key card from his pocket and twirled it like a coin. His confidence returned as if he'd remembered he was wealthy enough to feel untouchable. This is between you two, Kellen said, stepping back slightly. Jonah's gaze locked on the key card. Gold letters. Sweet number. Jonah didn't need to ask, he already knew. Maya's face went pale. Jonah spoke softly, each word deliberate. You came into our house. Kellen's smile thinned. Excuse me. Jonah didn't look away. You came into our house, and you laughed about me like I was furniture. Maya's eyes filled instantly, tears weaponized, as ready as her lipstick. Jonah, please. Not here. Where, then? Jonah asked. In the quiet room you took from me. Maya flinched, and for a fraction of a second the tears looked real. Kellen scoffed. Listen. Jonah turned his head just enough to cut Kellen with his gaze. Don't. Kellen blinked, surprised, then laughed without humor. You think you're... Jonah pulled his phone from his pocket and held it up. I have video of her coming home. I have bank statements. I have the hotel charges. I have the transfers labeled consulting. Maya froze. Kellen's face tightened for the first time. You've been snooping. I've been surviving, Jonah said. There's a difference. Maya's voice cracked. Jonah, I can explain. Jonah looked at her. Not at her makeup, not at her clothes, not at the performance, at the person behind it, the one he'd been trying not to see. You didn't just cheat, Jonah said quietly. You used our life to fund it. You brought him into our home. Maya's lips trembled. I was lonely. Jonah's chest tightened, but he didn't let the emotion drive the wheel. You were bored, Jonah corrected. And you thought I'd keep being polite. Kellen's jaw flexed. This is ridiculous. Maya, let's go. Jonah's gaze snapped back to him. No, Jonah said, voice suddenly harder. You don't get to walk away like this is a minor inconvenience. Kellen's eyes narrowed. You can't threaten me. Jonah's mouth curved into a humorless half-smile. I'm not threatening you. I'm telling you how this ends. Maya's breath came fast. Jonah, please. Jonah stepped back from them, the hallway suddenly feeling too small for the truth. I'm leaving, he said. And then I'm telling the truth in a courtroom. Maya reached toward him, but Jonah moved away from her hand as if her touch could stain him. He turned and walked to the elevator. Behind him, Maya whispered his name, raw with panic. Jonah. He didn't turn. He went home, packed a bag, and left that night. Not in a storm of shouting, not with smashed plates. He left in silence, because silence was the only thing Maya couldn't spin. The next months were brutal in the quiet way, legal meetings, forensic accounting, friends choosing sides based on who told the best story first. Maya's PR instincts kicked in immediately. She called Jonah's mother with tears. She posted vague quotes online about healing. She told people Jonah had been emotionally absent, that she'd felt invisible. Jonah didn't argue publicly. He let Diane handle the facts. Facts were heavier than quotes. And then the story broke without Jonah even pushing it. A journalist published an investigation into Kellen Price's business dealings, shell companies, payoffs hidden as consulting fees, donors funneled through nonprofits to secure zoning favors. Names surfaced. Receipts appeared. Kellen's empire, built on confidence and silence, began to crack. Maya's firm was named. Maya was named. The headlines didn't call it romance. They called it scandal. Maya showed up at Jonah's temporary apartment one afternoon, looking like someone who'd been awake for 3 days. Her hair was pulled back carelessly. Her eyes were swollen. She wore no lipstick. Without the performance, she looked younger. Smaller. More human. Jonah opened the door and felt his stomach drop anyway. Jonah, Maya whispered. Please. He didn't invite her in. He didn't shut the door either. He stood in the threshold, the seam between their old life and the new one. They're calling me, Maya said, voice shaking. Clients. The board. My mother. They think I. You did, Jonah said simply. Maya's face twisted. I didn't know about the other stuff. I didn't know he was. Jonah's eyes stayed steady. You knew enough to hide money. Maya's tears fell suddenly, fast. It wasn't, Jonah, it wasn't like that. Jonah didn't move. He didn't comfort her. He'd done enough of that. I loved you, Maya whispered. Jonah's throat tightened, but he forced the words out anyway. You loved what I provided. The stability. The image. The quiet men who wouldn't embarrass you. Maya flinched, pain flashing. That's not fair. Jonah's voice stayed low. It's the first fair thing that's happened in a long time. Maya wiped her face with the back of her hand like she was angry at her own tears. What do you want from me? Jonah stared at her. He could have said, suffer. He could have said, beg. He could have said, hurt the way I hurt. Instead he said the truth. I want you to stop performing, Jonah said. Even now. Especially now. Maya's mouth opened, then closed. She looked lost, like a woman dropped into a room without mirrors. I don't know how, she admitted. Jonah nodded once. That's not my problem anymore. Maya's shoulders slumped. For a moment she looked like she might crumble in the hallway. Then the survival part of her returned. Her chin lifted slightly. You're really going to let me drown? Jonah's gaze didn't change. I'm not holding your head under. I'm just not lying to save you. Maya stared at him for a long moment. Then she nodded, small and stiff, and turned away. Jonah closed the door gently. He leaned his forehead against it and breathed until the shaking passed. The divorce finalized in late winter. The court didn't care about Jonah's heartbreak, it cared about assets, documentation, and the clean, cold math of what belonged to whom. Jonah kept his business untouched. The house was sold. Maya lost her partnership. Kellen Price was indicted. The consulting transfers became evidence in a larger case. People who had smiled at Jonah at fundraisers avoided him now, as if betrayal were contagious. Some treated him like a victim. Others treated him like a threat, proof that truth could surface even when money tried to bury it. Jonah learned to live without the audience too. He moved into a smaller place, a quiet apartment above a bakery where mornings smelled like yeast and sugar and something hopeful. He worked less, chose projects more carefully. He stopped trying to make spaces look perfect for people who didn't want to live in them honestly. One Saturday, he visited a community arts center as a volunteer consultant. The building was old, paint peeling in places, but alive with messy energy. Kids ran down the hall with glitter on their faces. Someone strummed a guitar badly in a corner. A woman knelt on the floor taping paper to a table, sleeves rolled up, paint smudged on her forearm. Her hair was twisted up without care for symmetry. She looked up when Jonah approached. You're Jonah, she asked, voice straightforward. Yes, Jonah said. I'm Sienna, she said, standing and wiping her hands on her jeans. Sorry it's chaos. Real life happens here. Jonah felt something in his chest loosen, something he hadn't realized was clenched. Real life, Jonah repeated softly. Sienna nodded as if that mattered more than design. We don't have much money, but we have kids who need a place that doesn't judge them for being loud. Jonah looked around at the scuffed floors, the mismatched chairs, the sunlight falling through dusty windows. It wasn't curated. It was honest. I can work with this, Jonah said. Sienna's smile was small but real. Good. Because I don't have the energy for fake. Over the weeks that followed, Jonah helped renovate the art room with donated materials and clever solutions. He watched children paint on tables without fear. He watched Sienna laugh, unpolished, unguarded. It wasn't a lightning bolt love story. It was something slower and safer, trust rebuilt brick by brick. One evening after the final coat of paint dried, Jonah and Sienna sat on the front steps of the center. The air smelled like spring rain and the faint sweetness of someone's spilled juice. Sienna handed Jonah a cup of bad coffee. So, she said casually, you ever been married? Jonah's jaw tightened. Then he did something he'd never been good at before. He told the truth without decorating it. Yes, Jonah said. It ended badly. Sienna nodded. No drama. Mine too. They sat in silence for a moment, the kind that didn't feel like punishment. Jonah stared at the streetlight glow on wet pavement. I thought being easy to love meant being easy to live with, he admitted. Sienna tilted her head. And Jonah breathed out slowly. Turns out it can also mean you disappear. Sienna's eyes stayed on him, steady. Then don't disappear, she said simply. Not with me. Not with anyone. Jonah swallowed hard. In that moment, Jonah understood the real revenge he'd gotten, not the headlines, not the courtroom, not Maya's fall. The real revenge was becoming a man who couldn't be used anymore. Because he'd finally learned the thing he should have demanded from the start. A real relationship can survive conflict. A fake one can only survive silence. Months later, Jonah received a single message from Maya. No apology. No excuses. No manipulation. Just 7 words. I'm learning to live without applause. Jonah stared at the screen for a long time. Then he set the phone down and looked around his apartment, at the imperfect furniture he'd chosen for comfort instead of appearance, at the paint under his fingernails from helping the art center, at the quiet peace that didn't need anyone's approval. He didn't reply. Some chapters didn't need closure. They needed distance. And Jonah, at last, had enough of it to breathe.